I don't care if your daddy's some hotshot lawyer from Chicago. We keep our school pure, and we don't need your kind bringing down our standards. Jackson Reed's voice boomed through the crowded hallway of Westlake High. The star quarterback stood tall in his Letterman jacket, surrounded by his football teammates who snickered on cue. The busy Monday morning chaos instantly died down. Students who had been rushing past lockers stopped mid-conversation, the metallic clang of doors giving way to a tense silence. All eyes turned to the confrontation unfolding before them. Madison Johnson, the new transfer student who'd arrived just that morning, stood her ground. Her deep brown eyes remained steady, her blue-beaded braids clicking softly as she adjusted her stance. Despite being significantly shorter than Jackson, something in her calm demeanor suggested this wasn't her first encounter with a bully. He had no idea who he was messing with. Jackson stepped forward, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as he invaded Madison's personal space. The smell of his expensive cologne couldn't mask the stench of his prejudice. Madison's hands slowly clenched at her sides, her knuckles whitening slightly as the hallway fell completely silent. The gold championship ring on Jackson's finger caught the fluorescent light as he raised his hand in a dismissive gesture. This confrontation was about to go very differently than Jackson expected. Earlier that morning, before the confrontation with Jackson, Madison Johnson had walked through the main entrance of Westlake High for the first time. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind her with a soft thud that seemed to seal her fate. Her protective braids with small blue beads clicked gently with each step, providing a rhythmic counterpoint to the chaos of first-period preparations. The smell of floor cleaner and anxious teenage energy filled her nostrils. Madison took in her surroundings with careful observation. The trophy cases lining the entrance hall gleamed with golden figures frozen in athletic triumph. Banners celebrating state championships hung from the ceiling, and a large mural of the school mascot, a snarling timber wolf, dominated the wall opposite the administrative office. Everything about Westlake High screamed privilege and tradition. Principal Harrington, a tall man with a permanently distracted expression, had greeted her with a perfunctory handshake. "Welcome to Westlake, Ms. Johnson. Your transcripts are quite impressive." He glanced at the papers in his hand. "Perfect grades, I see. Though I noticed no extracurricular activities listed." Madison had simply nodded, offering no explanation about the hours she spent training at her dojo or the tournaments that had earned her 3 national titles. Those details weren't on her official transcripts, and she preferred to keep it that way. New school, new start. "This is Amber," Principal Harrington continued, gesturing to a blonde girl who was clearly impatient to rejoin her friends. "She'll show you to your first class." Amber had barely spoken 2 sentences before making an excuse about needing to speak with her chemistry teacher. She abandoned Madison at the intersection of 2 identical-looking hallways with vague directions to room 203. Madison found herself alone in the bustling corridor, invisible amid the crowd. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her mom. "Stay strong. Remember what Coach said. Humble on the outside, fierce on the inside." Madison took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs as she squared her shoulders. The weight of being the new kid, again, pressed down on her, but she'd been through worse. After the incident at her last school, her family had moved specifically so she could have a fresh start. No one here knew about her martial arts background, and she intended to keep it that way unless absolutely necessary. "New school, same game, stay invisible," she whispered to herself. Madison adjusted the strap of her backpack and headed toward what she hoped was the right direction, her beaded braids clicking softly with each determined step. Jackson Reed ruled Westlake High like his personal kingdom. The senior strutted down the main hallway as students parted before him like the Red Sea. His Letterman jacket, adorned with patches from 3 consecutive state championships, hung perfectly on his broad shoulders, and the morning light caught the gold of his championship ring as he high-fived teammates and nodded at teachers who smiled indulgently in his direction. The squeaking of expensive athletic shoes against polished floors announced his progress through the school. Jackson had perfected his swagger years ago, a walk that communicated to everyone that he owned every inch of space he occupied. The subtle scent of designer cologne trailed in his wake, mixing with the smell of the protein shake he carried in a monogrammed bottle. "Coach says we're going to crush Riverdale on Friday," he announced to no one in particular, his voice carrying across the hallway. Several students nodded enthusiastically, desperate for his attention. "Their defense can't handle my arm." A freshman hurried past, head down, clutching books to his chest. Without breaking his stride, Jackson extended his foot just enough to send the boy tumbling. Notebooks and papers scattered across the floor as the younger student fell hard on his knees. "Watch where you're going, loser," Jackson laughed, not even bothering to look back. His friends erupted in appreciative laughter, a few of them adding kicks to the fallen papers, sending them skittering further down the hallway. No teachers witnessed the incident, or if they did, they chose to ignore it. Jackson's father was the largest donor to the athletic department, and his mother headed the school board. Disciplining Jackson Reed simply wasn't worth the headache it would cause. Near the cafeteria entrance, Jackson and his entourage passed a group of students from the international club. "Man, what's with all these foreigners lately?" he commented loudly. "Between them and the scholarship cases, it's getting harder to keep our school's standards high." "Seriously," agreed his friend Brett, a linebacker whose neck was almost as thick as his head. "Some people just don't belong here." A Filipino student quickly gathered his things and walked away, eyes downcast. Jackson smirked, satisfied with the power he wielded with just a few words. It was then that Jackson noticed Madison for the first time. She stood at her newly assigned locker, carefully arranging her books. Something about her caught his attention. Perhaps it was the way she held herself, back straight, shoulders relaxed, seemingly unaffected by the chaos around her. Or maybe it was simply that she was new, and therefore an unknown entity in his carefully controlled ecosystem. "Fresh meat, boys," Jackson said, his eyes narrowing as he watched Madison. His voice dropped to a predatory tone that his friends recognized well. "And this one needs to learn her place." Madison methodically arranged her textbooks in her newly assigned locker, organizing them by class schedule rather than subject. The metal shelving felt cool under her fingertips as she worked, the distant sound of the warning bell signaling 5 minutes until the next period. She pinned her class schedule inside the door, then carefully placed a small photo frame beside it. A picture of herself in a white G, 3 gold medals hanging around her neck. Her fingers lingered on the image for just a moment before she quickly closed the locker door. The hallway had begun to clear as students hurried to their classes, but Madison felt the atmosphere shift before she heard the approaching footsteps. A shadow fell across her, accompanied by the strong scent of cologne and the subtle creak of leather Letterman jackets. She didn't need to turn around to know she was surrounded. "Hey, new girl, you lost?" Jackson's voice carried a false sweetness that barely masked its contemptuous undertone. "The community college is across town." Madison continued gathering her materials for the next class, her movements unhurried and precise. She felt Jackson move closer, the presence of his friends forming a loose semicircle that cut off easy escape routes. The blue beads in her braids clicked softly as she finally turned, finding herself face to chest with Jackson Reed. "I'm talking to you," Jackson said, his voice hardening. The hallway had grown quieter, remaining students slowing their pace to watch the unfolding scene. "Don't they teach manners where you're from?" Madison met his gaze calmly. "Excuse me, I need to get to class." Her voice was steady and neutral, neither confrontational nor submissive. She moved to step around the wall of athletes, but Jackson sidled smoothly into her path. The smell of floor wax and his overpowering cologne mixed unpleasantly in the confined space. "Class can wait," Jackson insisted. "We're having a little welcome conversation. I'm just trying to be friendly." His friends chuckled on cue, the sound echoing against the metal lockers. "You're from Chicago, right? South Side, I bet." Madison adjusted her grip on her books. "West Side, actually. And I really need to get to class." Jackson's smile didn't reach his eyes. You know, we have a certain way of doing things at Westlake. Certain expectations. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. Certain people just don't fit in here. The warning in his words was unmistakable, but Madison's expression remained unchanged. Years of tournament competition had taught her to keep her emotions hidden from opponents. She simply waited, her breathing steady, her stance relaxed but balanced. Growing irritated by her composure, Jackson suddenly knocked the books from her hands. They crashed to the floor with a sharp slap that echoed down the hallway. Several students gasped, and a few quickly ducked into classrooms to avoid being associated with the confrontation. "Oops," Jackson said with exaggerated innocence. "Guess they don't teach coordination in Chicago either." For a brief moment, Madison's eyes flashed with controlled anger. Her fingers twitched almost imperceptibly, muscle memory from countless training sessions beginning to engage before she consciously suppressed the reaction. Instead, she knelt down and began collecting her scattered books, her movements deliberate and calm. Jackson stood over her, clearly expecting tears or anger, some reaction that would affirm his power. When none came, his smirk faltered slightly. Madison gathered the last of her papers, rose smoothly to her feet with perfect balance, and simply walked around Jackson and his friends as if they were nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture. "This isn't over, new girl," Jackson called after her, but Madison continued walking, her beaded braids clicking rhythmically with each step as she disappeared around the corner. The cafeteria buzzed with midday energy, the clatter of plastic trays and the hum of 100 conversations creating a wall of sound. Madison sat alone at the end of a table, methodically eating her lunch while reviewing notes for her afternoon classes. The smell of overcooked tater tots and questionable meatloaf hung in the air, mingling with the artificial cherry scent of the cleaning solution used on the tables. "Did you hear about the new girl?" The whispered conversation from the table behind Madison carried clearly to her ears. "Jackson totally put her in her place this morning." "I heard she's here on some diversity scholarship," another voice added. "My dad says those are just for show." Madison kept her eyes on her notebook, but her pencil had stopped moving. For a moment, she was transported back to her dojo in Chicago, the memory so vivid she could almost feel the rough texture of the mat beneath her bare feet and smell the familiar blend of sweat and disinfectant. Her coach's voice echoed in her mind as clearly as if he were standing beside her. "Your technique is perfect, Madison. But remember, a true warrior knows when to fight. Power isn't about dominating others. It's about controlling yourself when everything inside you wants to lash out." The cafeteria came back into focus as a tray clattered down across from her. Madison looked up to find a girl with curly red hair and glasses smiling tentatively at her. "This seat taken?" the girl asked, already settling in. "I'm Zoe Bennett. You're in my AP Physics class." Madison nodded. "Madison Johnson." "I know," Zoe replied, lowering her voice. "Everyone's talking about how you stood up to Jackson this morning." "I didn't stand up to anyone," Madison said, closing her notebook. "I just walked away." Zoe leaned forward, her glasses sliding slightly down her nose. "That's standing up to Jackson in this school. Nobody walks away from him." She glanced around before continuing. "He's been worse since he got rejected from state. Takes it out on everyone, especially new kids." Madison took a sip of water, considering this information. "What's his deal anyway? Family money, sports star, ego the size of Texas?" Zoe shrugged. "The usual toxic combination. His dad practically owns half the school board." From across the cafeteria, Madison felt eyes on her. She didn't need to look up to know Jackson was watching her, probably already planning his next move. The weight of his stare prickled against her skin like static electricity. "I've dealt with bullies before," Madison said quietly. "Best to stay invisible." Zoe followed Madison's gaze to where Jackson sat holding court with his teammates and cheerleaders. "Yeah, well, invisibility might not be an option anymore. You're on his radar now." Jackson's eyes narrowed as he watched the interaction between the new girl and the science nerd. His fingers drummed against the tabletop, a steady rhythm that matched the thoughts forming in his mind. Madison Johnson had embarrassed him by walking away, and no one embarrassed Jackson Reed without consequences. The afternoon sun slanted through the high windows of the west hallway, casting long rectangles of light across the linoleum floor. Madison headed toward the water fountain, her throat dry after a particularly demanding literature discussion. The hallway was momentarily empty, the quiet a welcome respite from the day's constant tension. The gurgle of water hitting the metal basin filled the silence as Madison leaned down to drink. The cool liquid soothed her parched throat, and for a brief moment she closed her eyes, allowing herself to relax. "Enjoying our facilities?" Jackson's voice shattered the peace, the sudden intrusion causing Madison to straighten immediately. He stood blocking her path, flanked by Brett and two other football players. The afternoon sunlight caught in his blonde hair, creating an ironic halo effect around his head. Madison wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and attempted to step around the group. Jackson shifted, cutting off her escape route. The sudden movement sent a waft of his cologne toward her, expensive and overwhelming. "So what's your story, new girl?" Jackson asked, his voice louder now as students began to filter into the hallway between classes. "You don't talk much. What are you hiding?" Madison maintained eye contact but said nothing, her face carefully neutral. The growing audience only seemed to encourage Jackson, who stepped closer, invading her personal space. The leather of his jacket creaked as he crossed his arms. "I'm having a party Friday," he announced, looking around to ensure he had an audience. "Maybe you can be our entertainment. Show us some of those dances you people do." A few uncomfortable laughs sounded from the gathering crowd. Several students looked down or suddenly became very interested in their phones. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody spoke up. "No thanks," Madison finally replied, her voice calm and steady despite the accelerated beating of her heart. "And you should really work on your manners." A collective intake of breath swept through the onlookers. Jackson's face darkened, a flush of anger creeping up from his neck. The hallway fell silent except for the distant slam of a locker and the soft hum of the air conditioning system. "You think you're smart?" Jackson's voice dropped dangerously low as he leaned in. The gold chain around his neck caught the light as it swung forward. "I run this school. By Friday, you'll either be begging to come to my party or begging to transfer again." The threat hung in the air, as tangible as the tension between them. Madison held her ground, neither advancing nor retreating, her eyes never leaving Jackson's. Years of competitive martial arts had taught her how to remain composed under pressure, how to read an opponent's intentions from the smallest shifts in posture or expression. "Move aside, please," she said, each word measured and precise. Jackson's jaw tightened, the muscle visibly clenching beneath his skin. For a moment, it seemed he might escalate further, might cross the line from verbal intimidation to physical. His right hand curled into a fist at his side. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped back with an exaggerated bow. "As Her Highness commands." The mock deference dripped with sarcasm. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." He gestured to his friends, and they moved past Madison, deliberately bumping her shoulder as they went. The crowd began to disperse, the show apparently over for now. Madison remained still until they were gone, consciously controlling her breathing the way her coach had taught her. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out. Zoe appeared at her side, eyes wide behind her glasses. "Are you okay?" Madison nodded, finally allowing her shoulders to relax slightly. "Fine. You know he's not going to let this go, right?" Zoe whispered as they walked toward their next class. "No one challenges Jackson Reed." The warning bell rang, its shrill tone cutting through the hallway chatter. Madison adjusted her backpack strap, the weight of her books nothing compared to the weight of the situation developing around her. "There's a first time for everything," she said quietly, more to herself than to Zoe. The gymnasium echoed with squeaking sneakers and the hollow bounce of rubber balls against the polished floor. Physical education at Westlake High meant dodgeball today, and Madison stood in line as teams were selected. The musty smell of old equipment mingled with the sharp tang of sweat and the artificial pine scent of cleaning products. "Johnson," Coach Brewer called out without looking up from his clipboard. "Team 2. Madison moved to the designated side, feeling Jackson's eyes track her movement from where he stood as Team 1's captain. He whispered something to Brett, both of them chuckling as they looked in her direction. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everyone in an unflattering pallor. When the whistle blew, chaos erupted. Balls flew across the dividing line with varying degrees of speed and accuracy. Madison moved with practiced ease, her reactions quick but deliberately restrained. She dodged when necessary, caught a few easy throws, but never revealed the full extent of her reflexes or agility. "Come on, new girl, is that all you've got?" Jackson taunted from across the gym, spinning a ball on his fingertips. His voice carried over the commotion of the game. "Thought your people were supposed to be athletic." Madison ignored him, focusing instead on the game. She caught a ball thrown by one of the cheerleaders, sending the girl to the sidelines with a frustrated huff. The rubber surface of the ball felt rough against Madison's palms, still calloused from years of gripping GIs during training. Coach Brewer blew his whistle again, signaling the end of the round. As students gathered for water breaks, Zoe appeared at Madison's side, her face flushed from exertion. "You move really well," she observed, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Like, really well. Almost like you've had training." Madison shrugged, taking a small sip from her water bottle. "Just lucky, I guess." Zoe lowered her voice. "You should know Jackson's got major anger issues. His girlfriend dumped him after he didn't get into state university on a football scholarship. He was counting on that to go pro." "Sounds like a personal problem," Madison replied. "Yeah, well, he makes it everyone else's problem," Zoe continued. Last semester, a sophomore corrected his grammar in English class. Jackson and his friends dumped the kid's backpack in a toilet. The memory surfaced unbidden. Madison's first day at her previous school, the group of girls who'd decided the new kid was an easy target. The cruel comments about her hair, her clothes, her lunch, how they'd escalated to pushing, then to taking her things, then to the incident that had finally pushed her to join the dojo. How different she'd felt after 6 months of training, after her first competition, after earning her first medal. Her coach's voice echoed in her mind again. "Your skills are a shield, not a weapon. But sometimes shields must be shown to be effective." Madison watched as Jackson rejoined the game, aggressively targeting the smallest players on her team, throwing with unnecessary force. Coach Brewer seemed oblivious, busy with his phone on the sidelines. The second round began, and Madison continued her strategy of competent but unremarkable play. She avoided Jackson's throws without making it obvious that she could track the ball's trajectory with ease, that she could read his body language before he even released. Near the end of class, Jackson knocked down a freshman with a particularly vicious throw to the stomach. The boy lay on the floor, struggling to regain his breath as Jackson high-fived his teammates. Coach Brewer finally looked up, blew his whistle, and called for everyone to hit the showers 5 minutes early. As students filed toward the locker rooms, Madison heard Jackson's voice rise above the general chatter. "After school courtyard," he announced loudly. "I'm going to put the new girl in her place. Everyone's invited to watch." Several heads turned toward Madison, expressions ranging from concern to excitement at the prospect of drama. Zoe appeared at her side, eyes wide behind her glasses. "He can't be serious," she whispered. "You need to tell Principal Harrington." Madison watched Jackson's retreating back, the set of his shoulders broadcasting confidence and entitlement. A strange calm settled over her, the familiar pre-competition focus narrowing her thoughts. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think I do." Word traveled through Westlake High like electricity through a copper wire. By lunch period, everyone had heard about the confrontation scheduled for after school. The cafeteria buzzed with anticipation. Students huddled in groups discussing the upcoming event with a mixture of excitement and discomfort. The clinking of utensils against trays provided a metallic soundtrack to the gossip. "Jackson's going to destroy her," a sophomore declared between bites of pizza. "Isn't anyone going to stop this?" a freshman girl asked, her voice barely audible above the cafeteria noise. "Stop what?" her friend replied. "It's just going to be a conversation. Jackson wouldn't actually hit a girl, right?" Madison sat alone at her usual table, methodically working through her lunch while reviewing notes for her history test. To anyone watching, she appeared completely unaware of, or unbothered by, the storm gathering around her. Only the slight tension in her shoulders and the way she occasionally glanced at the clock betrayed her awareness. Between 5th and 6th periods, Madison slipped into an empty classroom and pulled out her phone. Her finger hovered over her mother's contact information before she finally pressed call. The connection clicked after 3 rings. "Madison? Is everything okay? You never call during school hours?" Her mother's voice carried the immediate concern of a parent receiving an unexpected call. Madison leaned against a desk, the cool laminate surface grounding her. "It's happening again, Mom." A brief silence on the other end, then a sigh that contained both understanding and resignation. "The bullying?" "Yeah. There's this guy, Jackson. He's been targeting me since I arrived." Madison kept her voice low, though the classroom was empty. The ticking of the wall clock punctuated her words. "He's called me out for after school. Everyone's talking about it." "Have you told the principal?" Her mother's voice had taken on the careful neutrality that Madison recognized from their many similar conversations at her previous school. "It wouldn't help. He's untouchable here. Rich family, star athlete, the usual story." Another pause, longer this time. "Are you scared?" Madison considered the question, examining her feelings with the emotional awareness her coach had instilled in her. "No," she realized. "I'm not scared. Not this time." "Remember what we discussed," her mother said, her voice firm but gentle. "You never start it, but you can finish it. Your father and I support you, but—" "I know. Restraint first. Always." Madison straightened up as the warning bell rang. "I have to go. I'll call you after." "I love you, Madison." "Love you too, Mom." Throughout her afternoon classes, Madison maintained her outward composure while mentally preparing for what was to come. In Algebra 2, she caught snippets of whispered conversations. "I heard she mouthed off to Jackson this morning. My brother said Jackson's going to make her apologize in front of everyone. This is messed up. Someone should tell a teacher." But no one did. The undercurrent of excitement was too strong, the allure of potential drama too compelling. Madison kept her eyes on her textbook, working through quadratic equations with mechanical precision while her mind rehearsed scenarios, strategies, contingencies. Flashbacks to her tournament experiences played in her head. The bright lights of the competition arena, the hushed anticipation of the crowd, the focused calm that descended over her in the moments before a match. She remembered standing across from opponents twice her size, the respectful bow before engaging, the split-second decisions that determined victory or defeat. This would be different. This wasn't a controlled environment with referees and rules. This was messy, complicated by social dynamics and school politics. But the fundamental principles remained the same. Stay centered, read your opponent, use their momentum against them, and only apply the force necessary. No more, no less. As the final bell rang, students poured into the hallways with unusual energy, many heading directly for the courtyard instead of the buses or parking lot. Madison packed her bag with deliberate slowness, taking time to organize her books and notes while the initial rush subsided. Zoe appeared in the doorway, her face pinched with worry. "Madison, please don't go out there. We can go out the science wing exit. My mom can give you a ride home." Madison zipped her backpack closed, the sound sharp in the emptying classroom. "I appreciate that, Zoe, but running won't solve anything." "He's got his whole team out there," Zoe's voice rose an octave. "This isn't just about today. They could make the rest of your time here miserable." Madison stood, slinging her backpack over one shoulder. The weight of the decision settled on her alongside it. "They already are making it miserable. For me and for others. Sometimes you have to stand up, even when it's hard." Together they walked through the rapidly emptying hallways. The distant sound of excited voices grew louder as they approached the courtyard doors. Sunlight streamed through the glass panels, unusually bright after the fluorescent interior lighting. Madison paused at the threshold, taking a deep breath. She could see the crowd gathered in a loose circle near the center of the courtyard, Jackson's blonde head visible above most of the others. The murmur of anticipatory conversation carried through the closed doors. "You don't have to do this," Zoe said one last time. Madison adjusted her grip on her backpack strap, the familiar motion centering her the way adjusting her GI belt did before a match. In her mind, she heard the echo of her coach's instructions before her first national competition. "Walk onto the mat like you belong there. Your journey to this moment has earned you the right to stand tall." "Actually," Madison said quietly, "I think maybe I do." She pushed the door open and stepped into the sunlight, walking slowly but purposefully toward the gathering crowd, her beaded braids clicking softly with each step. The courtyard of Westlake High formed a natural arena, enclosed by red brick walls on three sides with wrought iron benches arranged in a semicircle. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the concrete, and the air carried the sweet scent of nearby flowering bushes mixed with the metallic tang of anticipation. Students had formed a tight circle, their backpacks discarded at their feet or clutched against their chests like shields. The crowd parted as Madison approached, whispers rippling outward like concentric circles in a disturbed pond. A few phones were already raised, recording the unfolding drama. Jackson stood in the center of the human ring, his Letterman jacket discarded on a nearby bench, revealing a tight athletic shirt that emphasized his muscular build. His usual entourage flanked him, Brett and two other football players whose names Madison hadn't bothered to learn. Jackson's face lit up with a predatory smile when he spotted her. "There she is!" he called out, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "The girl who thinks she's too good to talk to anyone." The crowd's murmuring intensified. Madison felt dozens of eyes tracking her movement as she stepped into the circle, allowing the human barrier to close behind her. She set her backpack down carefully, maintaining eye contact with Jackson the entire time. "I just want to be left alone, Jackson," Madison said, her voice calm but loud enough to carry to the spectators. The beads in her braids clicked softly as she adjusted her stance. Jackson scoffed, looking around at the audience to ensure they appreciated his disdain. "That's not how it works here. See, at Westlake, we have a social order." He began to circle her slowly, like a shark testing the waters. "And you need to understand your place in it." "And where exactly is that?" Madison asked, turning slightly to keep him in view, her movements economical and controlled. "At the bottom," Jackson replied with a smirk. "Where you belong." A few uncomfortable laughs sounded from the crowd. Madison noticed Zoe at the edge of the circle, her face tight with worry. Beside her stood the freshman who'd been hit during dodgeball, his expression a mixture of fear and vindictive hope. "Look," Madison said, addressing not just Jackson but the entire audience. "I'm not interested in whatever hierarchy you've created. I'm here to learn, same as everyone else." "Oh, she's here to learn," Jackson mocked, his voice rising in a poor imitation of Madison's. "Hear that, everyone? The diversity admit wants to be treated like a real student." The words hung in the air, their ugliness casting a pall over the courtyard. Several students looked down, embarrassed by the naked prejudice but unwilling to challenge it. The only sounds were the distant call of birds and the soft rustle of leaves in the afternoon breeze. "You don't know anything about me," Madison said, her tone unchanged despite the provocation. Jackson stepped closer, entering her personal space. His cologne was overpowering at this distance, mixing unpleasantly with the scent of sweat and aggression. I know enough. I know you think you're special because the school needed to fill some quota. I know you walk around like you're better than everyone here. Madison remained still, neither advancing nor retreating. Is there a point to all this, Jackson? Or did you just gather everyone to listen to you talk? A flush of anger crept up Jackson's neck, turning his face an unflattering shade of red. The veins in his forearms stood out as he clenched his fists at his sides. The point, he said through gritted teeth, is to teach you some respect. Without warning, he reached out and pushed Madison's shoulder, hard enough to force her to take a step back. The crowd gasped collectively, the physical contact crossing a line that even they recognized shouldn't be breached. Don't touch me again, Madison said, her voice dropping to a warning tone that would have been recognizable to anyone who had seen her compete. Jackson laughed, the sound harsh and without humor. Or what? What are you going to do about it? He raised his hand again, clearly intending to push harder this time. Something shifted in Madison's demeanor, a subtle change that would have been imperceptible to most, but was unmistakable to those trained to read body language. Her weight redistributed, her breathing slowed, her eyes focused with laser-like intensity on Jackson's advancing form. The transformation was internal, but profound, the student disappearing as the competitor emerged. The courtyard fell silent, the tension stretching like an over-tightened wire. Even the birds seemed to pause their songs, as if sensing the imminent change in the atmosphere. Jackson's hand moved forward, his fingers splayed, aiming for Madison's shoulder again. I warned you, Madison said, so quietly that only Jackson could hear her. Time seemed to slow down as his hand approached. Madison remained perfectly still until the last possible moment, her muscles coiled like springs, ready to unleash 3 years of disciplined training in response to this boy who had never faced a real challenge in his life. The sound of a door slamming open shattered the moment. Principal Harrington's voice boomed across the courtyard. What's going on out here? But it was too late to halt the momentum of what had been set in motion. Jackson's hand connected with Madison's shoulder just as the principal's words registered, and what happened next would change the social dynamics of Westlake High forever. Time compressed into a series of crystal-clear moments as Jackson's hand made contact with Madison's shoulder. The pressure of his fingers against her collarbone, the subtle shift in her center of gravity, the widening of his eyes as he realized something was fundamentally wrong with the scenario he had created. All of it registered with perfect clarity in Madison's trained awareness. Madison moved with a fluidity that seemed impossible for someone her size. She sidestepped precisely, her right hand coming up to secure Jackson's extended wrist, while her left established control at his elbow. The motion appeared almost gentle, a dance rather than a defensive technique, until the moment she used Jackson's own forward momentum against him. The courtyard fell into complete silence. The collective intake of breath from dozens of onlookers was the only sound as Madison executed a perfect hip throw, her years of training evident in every aspect of the movement. Jackson's feet left the ground, his body rotating helplessly in the air before gravity reclaimed him. He landed with a heavy thud that seemed to reverberate through the concrete. Madison maintained her grip on his wrist, transitioning smoothly into a controlled arm lock that immobilized him completely without causing injury. The entire sequence had taken less than 2 seconds. Principal Harrington froze at the edge of the circle, his mouth open in mid-reprimand. The students nearest to him instinctively stepped aside, providing him a clear view of Jackson Reed, star quarterback, social apex predator of Westlake High, pinned helplessly to the ground by the new transfer student. What the? Brett began, taking a step forward before stopping abruptly when Madison shifted her position slightly, making it clear that any further pressure on Jackson's joint would be extremely uncomfortable. I wouldn't, she said calmly, her breathing barely elevated. The beads in her braids had settled back into place, clicking softly as she adjusted her hold. Jackson struggled against the lock, his face contorted with a mixture of pain, shock, and humiliation. His free hand scrabbled uselessly against the concrete, finding no purchase, no way to leverage himself out of the position. For perhaps the first time in his life, his physical prowess meant absolutely nothing. How did she move so fast? someone whispered from the crowd, the words clearly audible in the stunned silence. "Did you see how she flipped him? He's twice her size." Madison maintained the hold, her face composed, her eyes alert but not angry. She waited until Jackson's struggles subsided, until the realization of his complete helplessness sank in. Only then did she speak, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the courtyard. "I'm a 3-time junior national champion in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu," she announced, the words landing like stones in still water. "I could dislocate your shoulder right now, but that's not who I am." The revelation rippled through the crowd. Students exchanged glances, some pulling out phones to verify her claim, others simply staring in disbelief. Principal Harrington remained frozen, seemingly unsure whether to intervene in a situation so far outside his experience. Jackson's face, pressed against the concrete, flushed a deeper shade of red. The humiliation of being subdued so completely in front of his peers, in front of the entire school, was written in every line of his body. A thin sheen of sweat had broken out across his forehead, reflecting the afternoon sunlight. "Let me go," he demanded, but the words came out strained, undermining any attempt at maintaining his dignity. Madison looked down at him, not with triumph or mockery, but with a steady gaze that contained years of hard-earned wisdom. "You judged me by my skin and gender. That was your mistake. I judge people by their character. That's your lesson." With precise control, she released the arm lock and stood in one fluid motion, stepping back to give Jackson space. She maintained a ready stance, balanced, centered, prepared for any potential retaliation, but her face remained calm, her breathing steady. Jackson scrambled to his feet, his movements awkward and ungraceful compared to Madison's controlled precision. He rubbed his wrist where she had held him, the skin reddened but not bruised. His usual confidence had evaporated, leaving behind a confused teenage boy who had just had his worldview dramatically rearranged. The crowd remained silent, collectively holding their breath as they waited to see what would happen next. The social hierarchy that had seemed so immutable just minutes before now hung in the balance, dependent on how its former leader would respond to such a public defeat. Jackson looked around, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes fixed on him, the phones recording every moment of his humiliation. His teammates stood frozen, no one stepping forward to help him regain his lost status. Even Brett looked uncertain, clearly recalculating his own position in light of this new information. Principal Harrington finally found his voice, stepping into the circle with administrative authority reasserting itself. "Everyone disperse immediately. School grounds are not for whatever this was. Go home now or there will be consequences." But no one moved. The moment was too significant, the shift in power too fundamental to walk away from. Instead, all eyes remained fixed on Jackson and Madison, waiting to see how this new dynamic would resolve. Madison stood her ground, neither advancing nor retreating. Her posture communicated both confidence and restraint, the hallmarks of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of and had nothing to prove. The afternoon sun caught the blue beads in her braids, creating tiny points of light that seemed to emphasize the quiet dignity of her stance. Jackson opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. The usual stream of confident assertions and cutting remarks had deserted him. For perhaps the first time since entering Westlake High, he found himself without the shield of social status or physical intimidation. "You could have done that at any time," he finally said, the realization dawning in his voice. "From the first day." Madison nodded once. "I could have, but you didn't." "Force is a last resort," Madison replied, repeating her coach's mantra. "Not a first response." Something shifted in Jackson's expression. Not acceptance, not quite understanding, but perhaps the first crack in a worldview that had never before been challenged. He looked at Madison with new eyes, seeing not just a transfer student or a diversity admission, but a person with depths and complexities he had never bothered to consider. The courtyard remained suspended in that moment of realization. the social tectonics of Westlake High shifting irreversibly beneath their feet. Jackson scrambled to his feet, brushing dirt from his clothes with shaking hands. The confident swagger that had defined his presence at Westlake High had vanished, replaced by the uncertain movements of someone whose entire reality had just been upended. The silence in the courtyard was absolute. No whispers, no shuffling feet, not even the click of phone cameras as students stood transfixed by the scene. Zoe was the first to break the spell. She stepped forward, slowly at first, then with growing confidence as she began to applaud. The sound of her solitary clapping echoed against the brick walls, startlingly loud in the silence. Then another student joined, then another, until a wave of applause spread through the crowd. Madison remained still, her face showing neither triumph nor satisfaction. This hadn't been about humiliating Jackson. It had never been about that. The validation of her peers, while welcome, wasn't why she had stood her ground. I'm sorry, Jackson said, the words clearly unfamiliar in his mouth. He spoke quietly, but in the courtyard's strange acoustics, everyone heard him. You're right. I judged you without knowing you. Madison studied his face, looking past the humiliation to see if there was genuine understanding beneath. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she extended her hand. New start? Jackson hesitated, looking at her offered hand as if it might be another martial arts trap. Then, with a reluctance that gradually gave way to respect, he reached out and shook it. The gesture was simple but profound, a public acknowledgement that something fundamental had changed. Students exchanged glances, processing this new reality where Jackson Reed had been bested not just physically, but morally. Principal Harrington finally managed to push through the circle of students, his face flushed with administrative concern. What's happening here? Is there a problem? Before Madison or Jackson could respond, voices from the crowd answered, Nothing's wrong, sir. Just showing the new girl around, sir. School spirit, Mr. Harrington! The principal looked skeptical, his eyes moving from Madison to Jackson, clearly sensing he had missed something significant. Well, keep it civil, and start heading home. The buses are waiting. As the crowd began to disperse, moving in small groups toward the parking lot or bus lane, Madison felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time since arriving at Westlake, she walked through the school grounds without the constant tension of waiting for the next confrontation. Has someone ever underestimated you? We all face those who judge us before knowing our true strength. Tell us your story in the comments below. We read every single one. This is Beat Stories, where we bring you real moments of triumph against all odds. If this video inspired you to stand your ground or showed you something new about judging others, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. And if you want more stories that'll make your heart race and your spirit soar, hit subscribe and that notification bell.
Every time someone stands up, speaks out, or refuses to be erased, a new story is born. At Beat Stories, we archive that courage. Subscribe now and help us keep these moments alive, because the more we share them, the harder they are to ignore.